Okay, here is the stream link. I'm going to put the stream link in the chat here for anybody to share with their friends if they want. And welcome. My name is Gidon Ariel. I am the executive director of Root Source, and I am delighted to welcome you all to tonight's program, which is the special launch, the virtual launch of this brand new book, edited and produced by Dr. Rivka Lambert-Adler, Lighting Up the Nations. There it is, it's backwards. So instead of being able to see it backwards, I'm going to share my screen and show it to you right like that. That is the cover of the book. And this is a very special book, Lighting Up the Nations, Jewish Responsibility Towards the Nations Today and in the Messianic Era. While putting together this book, Dr. Adler and me and I, who are very good and old friends, had a good number of arguments. It was, for me, I said, why call this Jewish Responsibility Towards the Nations Today and in the Messianic Era? As far as I'm concerned, we're already in the Messianic Era. So it seemed to be a little bit redundant to me, but I'm always make sure that anybody who wants to publish a book with Root Source Press gets to do what they want to do pretty much. So that is what we're hearing tonight. Tonight, we will be hearing from the editor and author of this book. Rivka, meanwhile, are you clicking through over there?
I am letting them in.
Your admit finger is on fire. Very good. So once again, in a moment, we will be hearing an introduction from the editor of our book that we're all here together for. Following that, we will be hearing a mini shiur from Rabbi Pinchas Winston entitled Lighting Up the Nations and Redemption. And we will finish up the evening with a panel moderated by Rabbi Yishai Fleischer of the spokesperson of the Jewish community in Hebron, my neighbor over here, together with myself, Anna Rita Kreisman, and Rabbi Dr. Yaakov Nagen. So we've got a few good more minutes until that happens. So tonight, to begin with, I would be very happy to, before I stop sharing the screen and introduce Dr. Lambert Adler, I would like to just point out that you can already purchase our book on Root Source, the website that I run. We have a store. If you click through the store, you'll be able to get to a list of about a dozen of our books. And then you will be able to see the first book is our book tonight, Light Up the Nations. You can click through there through to Amazon, or you can try to order a hardcover or soft cover paperback or PDF Bless Israel edition. You can read about them when you hover over the button. You don't have to buy your edition tonight, but you might as well. It'll take a little while to get to you. So we're looking forward to having you read the book and, of course, get back to Dr. Adler or me or anybody else, or certainly put your recommendation on Amazon so that many, many, many other people will be able to read this very important book. So now that we've given the little advertisement for that, I would like to invite Dr. Rivka Lambert-Adler, the editor of the new book, Lighting Up the Nations, to speak. Thank you, Rivka Adler.
Okay, thank you, Gidon. Let me just get my screen squared away. Okay, so my name's Dr. Rivka Lambert-Adler. I'm a writer and an adult Jewish educator based in Israel. And as Gidon said, the book that we're here to introduce you to today is called Lighting Up the Nations, Jewish Responsibility Toward the Nations Today and in the Messianic Era. And in a very real way, this book is a companion to my first book, which was called 10 from the Nations, Torah Awakening Among Non-Jews. A number of you are probably familiar with this book. It was published almost exactly 4 years ago. And taken together, these books shine a light on a paradigm shifting phenomenon with which I and my colleagues and all of the contributors to this book are really privileged to engage. I call that phenomenon the Torah awakening among non-Jews. 10 from the Nations described the phenomenon, and Lighting Up the Nations is intended to reawaken awareness among the Jewish people specifically of our biblical mandate to share the oneness of God and the universal wisdom of Torah with those who are seeking truth and an honest path to God. So I want to tell you, I was thinking how to really let you know a little bit about how this happened for me. And it goes all the way back, I think, to 2002, when a certain man from Nigeria reached out to me by email, and he told me that he was from the Igbo tribe, which I had never heard of at that point. And he explained that his people are descendants of the ancient Israelites, and he was trying to find ways to reconnect them with Israel and the Jewish people. Now, at the time, I was puzzled about how he found me and why he reached out to me specifically, but it kept happening. Over the next dozen years or so, a series of non-Jews would private message me on Facebook because they were looking for a Jewish connection. So I don't remember all of them, but in one case, there was a man who had recently discovered that he had Jewish roots in his family history, and he was trying to understand the implications of that. There was another man who believed that on a walk that he took in the southwest of the US, that he had found an artifact from the Holy Temple, and he was trying to find somebody to help him return it to Israel. And other times people had a Jewish question and they were looking for a Jewish person to ask. And I kept wondering, as it was happening, I am hardly the only Jew on Facebook. How did this person decide to reach out to me specifically? And then around 2015, it became clear to me that Hashem had actually been preparing me all along. He'd been sending me these non-Jews kind of to warm up the playing field, because around 2015, things started to really explode for me. And I started meeting non-Jews who knew more about Judaism than most non-Orthodox Jews that I knew. They were studying Hebrew. They were studying the weekly Torah portion. They knew what the weekly Torah portion was. They were rigorously avoiding eating pork and shellfish. They were making challah every Friday. They were having special meals to honor Shabbat. They were gathering with like-minded people, non-Jewish friends, to celebrate what they call the biblical festivals, in particular Passover and Sukkot. At the time, so this is 6 or 7 years ago, I was, like most Jews, completely unaware of how widespread these practices were or what was motivating them. I found these people fascinating, and I thought other people might as well. And so in 2017, I published 10 from the Nation's Torah Awakening Among Non-Jews, which told the story of this phenomenon. But my involvement didn't end there. My involvement with these inspiring non-Jews increased, and it became unbelievably clear to me that they were desperately in need of Jewish teachers. There were a couple of problems facing them. Most of them didn't live anywhere near any kind of a Jewish community. And also, most Jews had no idea that these people existed. And anyway, most Jews had, and still have, a deep mistrust of all non-Jews, especially people with a Christian background. Nevertheless, I began to see that some things were starting to happen. There were a small group of Torah Jews, mostly English speaking, mostly based in Israel, who were starting to respond with various initiatives. So I was involved in a few of the projects to help educate non-Jews from a Torah true perspective, not in any way to encourage them to convert, but to teach them what God and his Torah has to say to them specifically as non-Jews. Now, I've always understood this emerging interest in Israel, in the Jews, in Torah, and in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that we call Hashem, that all of this interest that was coming from the nations was part of Geula, part of the messianic process, leading to the full, final, and complete redemption. So fast forward to 2018, I'm involved a little bit in this work online, and I see that there's a comment made by a Jewish woman on Facebook. I took a screenshot of it because it was rather obtuse and a little bit crass. And she wrote, this is an exact quote, "Not sure WTF Christians have to do with the Geula." So I realized that in her crass way of expressing that for many Jewish people, they were used to thinking of Geula and redemption as only relevant for Jews. And that comment motivated me to move forward with this book, Lighting Up the Nations. It's a book that's intended to explain the proper relationship between the Jewish people and the rest of the nations from an authentic Torah perspective. And it's divided into 4 main sections. So the introductory chapters lay the groundwork by explaining in more detail how the relationship between Jews and the nations is in flux. And that's, I think, the best way that I can describe what's going on right now is that something dramatic is happening, but we are very much still in the early stage, in the midst of it. Then there's part 1 of the book that includes chapters on Jewish values and teachings, including from Kabbalah and Chassidut, that are relevant for all of humanity. There are 3 cases of Jewish-led Torah study projects intended specifically for non-Jews, for people from the nations. There's a look at the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the Noahide laws, and why Jews need to know more about them, and more. In part 2, the book looks ahead to the further down the road in the Messianic era and how things are expected to change. So there's an extensive look at biblical verses that emphasize the idea that the eventual universal worship of the one true God of Israel appears over and over again throughout the Bible and even in Jewish prayer. This section also includes a deep dive into the implications of the eventual reunification of the Northern Kingdom, also known as the 10 Lost Tribes, with the rest of ancient Israel, commonly known today as the Jews, and a look also at how the Third Temple is relevant for all of humanity, not just for the Jews. So that was basically the structure of the book until a short while before publication, when one of the contributors, Rabbi Avraham Greenbaum, who wrote the chapter on the Third Temple, he released this astonishing monograph that explored the question of who among non-Jews are permitted by Jewish law to study Torah and to keep Shabbat. And his monograph actually added about 100 pages to the book. So it's almost a third of the book, but it was so directly related to what I was trying to do with this book that I asked his permission to include it as an addendum, and he graciously granted permission. So that's basically the structure of the book. Now today, and in a trend that's only growing in strength and in reach, the Jewish people are being asked to respond to spiritual seekers of all kinds in ways we have not seen since the beginning of Christianity. So my goal with this book is to remind the Jewish people of our God-given role as Or LaGoyim, a light to the nations, and to inspire us to respond to those who truly desire to know God's truth and to respond to them with kindness and with respect. We are so grateful that you're here with us tonight. And as Gidon said, we structured the evening so you'll hear from other voices, adding some richness and perspective to the topic at hand. So next up is Rabbi Pinchas Winston. Rabbi Winston is the incredibly prolific author of more than 100 books on Torah philosophy, and you can find them at his website, 36.org, spelled out. I first started learning with Rabbi Winston over 20 years ago when we still lived in America. And he was the first person to introduce me to the concept that Geula, that redemption, was actually relevant for our generation. I've often referred to him as my personal Geula guru, and it's my pleasure to introduce him to you tonight. Rabbi Winston, please join us.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's certainly a special event, a special occasion, because it's a special period of history. And it's important to be aware of the opportunities and how to use them and to know what's going on, because I think everybody today admits and sees that there are major changes taking place. 25, 30 years ago was a hard sell. I remember trying to convince people that we're now in the final stages of history. Rivka was an easy sell for the most part. But other people, they couldn't see it. The Twin Towers certainly was a jolt to a large degree, but now, things seem to accelerate. People feel that the world's undergoing tremendous transformation, and the question is to what, to where, and how we're supposed to respond to it and deal with it. On topic, I think that one of the most important sources for me personally to dealing with the subject itself actually has been speaking to me for many years. We have something, a part of our prayer service called slichot. And basically, slichot is, we don't do it all the time, although the Sfaradim do it on a daily basis. But for the most part, the Ashkenazim, we do it on special occasions, for example, in advance of Rosh Hashanah at that time of year. And we just finished a set of 3 recently. And basically, it's a series of prayers that we say, asking God for forgiveness. That, slicha means like, I apologize. And you bump into somebody, slicha, I'm sorry. It's asking God to forgive us for the mistakes that we make. And it's a very moving series of paragraphs and prayers that are very unique compared to the rest of the prayer service. And there's one particular point that always struck me. Unfortunately, they tend to go very fast. They're set off in the morning before people are always on the move and ready to go someplace else, and not everybody gets into these things. But if you get a chance to pay attention, then you notice a lot of very important ideas that come up that are there to focuses on our responsibility as the Jewish people and in terms of the final redemption. But the climax, I personally feel, comes in a prayer towards the end, in advance of something called Shema Kolenu, where we're asking God to hear our voices and to have mercy on us. It starts off, Zochor Lanu Bris Avos, right? God, please remember the covenant of our fathers. And it's a long paragraph, probably the longest of the entire series of prayers. And in this, you find all kinds of reference to biblical verses, specifically the Torah, about how God is going to redeem the Jewish people at the end of history, and how He'll gather us in from the four corners of the earth and bring the Messiah, et cetera, and forgive our sins, and that we should get our act together. Finally, after thousands of years of history, fix the world up. Get everything the way it's supposed to be. We've been trying for a lot of, for thousands of years. We came a little bit close during the time of Solomon and his temple that he built, but it didn't, even though it lasted over 400 years, nevertheless, we didn't quite live up to the expectations. There was still history to be lived out. But as we end this prayer and we get right to the end of it, it says, to the Einu El HaKadshecha, right, bring us back to our holy mount. Our holy mountain, of course, is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the place of both temples and the final temple to be, God willing, soon in our time. And it says, V'samcheinu b'beis tefillosecha, and we will rejoice in the house of your prayer, right? That we're going to pray. That's what the temple was, even though sacrifices were brought there. But sacrifices and prayer are basically the same thing, connecting to God. The word korban, which means a sacrifice, comes in the word, right, to come close. We bring sacrifices to come close. We pray to God to come closer to Him, not just to talk and make requests, but to come closer to Him. And Kemashu Kasuv, as it says in the verse, El Har Kadshi, I will bring them right back to my holy mountain. And they're going to rejoice in my house of prayer. This is God speaking. We're quoting God, right? They're going to bring their offerings and offer them on the altar. My altar, God says, and everything up until now. The entire time, the entire service, everything up until now, basically clearly applies to the Jewish people. And we would think that it applies to the Jewish people, and we would suppose that it has to apply to the Jewish people and nobody else. And this last statement always threw me for a loop. Always, somehow just, I didn't know what it was doing here. What was it telling me? I mean, it's Or Goyim, we have a mitzvah, we have a commandment in the book of Yeshaya, Isaiah, that says that God, He took us out of Egypt, He appointed us, He made us a nation specifically to be led into nations, 100%. We know that. That's on the side of the United Nations, I believe, until this very day. That's an ongoing mission. But yeah, who thinks in those terms? We're so busy trying to just rebuild the Jewish people and get back on track and do what we're supposed to do and get it right and have a third temple and Messiah, et cetera, et cetera. But Chazal, the rabbis who composed this particular tefillah, felt it was important to end off with the following words. And he says, Ki beisi beis tefillah, because my house is a house of tefillah, yikareh l'chol ha'amim. That's what it's going to be called by all the nations. All the peoples living at the time of the third temple, they're all going to refer to the temple as a place of worship. Now, why is that so important? What do we care? I mean, obviously, it's a nice thing if we're all on the same page and everyone's getting along, which is what's going to happen anyhow in the Messianic era. And we know we've been trying to sell the idea of one God to the world for thousands of years. We know that's what has to happen. We say in the Pray Aleinu that at the end of days, in the Messianic time, that God will be one, his name will be one, that everybody will recognize that he's the true God. He made creation, he runs the world, he oversees everything. Even at times it seems he's very distant, he's still there. We know that has to happen at some point in time, but why in the middle of our slichot, at this time that we're asking God for forgiveness as a nation, as a people, that we insert these words that it should like to all the nations of the world. And you can feel just through the words, if you're a little bit empathic, you could just feel that the message being conveyed to the Jewish people is that we have a mission. That even though for thousands of years that we've been very innerly focused, and unfortunately sometimes that's because we have developed a certain paranoia, rightly so, because of all the anti-Semitism, persecution, and difficult times, and even financial things. But ultimately speaking, the Jewish people are not here just to be a nation unto themselves. That's just the preparatory stage. That's just part of our development as a people. But ultimately speaking, the whole world, it's not complete. God's not happy with everything. He doesn't feel that creation and history has reached its climax until everybody in the entire world. Just like, for example, in the temple service, you had the priests, you had Kohanim, you had priests who offered the sacrifices on behalf of the nation. But if there's no nation to offer sacrifices on behalf of the priests, they don't mean that much. It doesn't count for a whole lot. It was because there was a people that they could offer the sacrifices on their behalf and connect to God for them that it made the whole service meaningful. Likewise, the Jewish people, we were given a Torah. It's a historical thing, goes back in time. Abraham, it's not just, he chose God. So therefore God chose him. And from his seed came Yitzchak, Isaac, then came Jacob and the family. And eventually we stood at Mount Sinai and received the Torah. But God said, with this Torah, you're going to elevate the entire world. It's here to share. You have a responsibility and an obligation to elevate the perspective of all mankind. There's different ways of doing that. The first way, of course, is to live by it, is to be a living example of it, to show, people look and they have to see, an example, for example, in the Talmud that is mentioned is at one time in our history when things were going much better, we had unity as a people, we all lived in the land, and some foreigner came looking for oil, Shemen Zayis, olive oil. And he went to the territory of Asher because they were famous for their oil, and they filled up container upon container upon container upon, and more oil than the man could even possibly imagine. And he was amazed. Why was he amazed? Because it was one people under one God, with one language, eating one type of food. It wasn't the United Nations. And he was amazed that so many people could be living according to the same rules and get along so well. It was such a Kiddush Hashem, such a sanctification of the name of God. The divisions that we have amongst the Jewish people today, the arguments that we have, the fact that some people do believe, some people don't believe. What do you learn from all of that? It loses its credibility, its veracity. So we have been working first on ourselves to try to get our act together. That as a nation of people, we can be, you can't be a teacher if you are not being a living example of what you're trying to teach. But we cannot forget, ultimately speaking, that our role here is to fulfill that verse in the Ledu, to make the name of God one. And how do we make the name of God one? That we teach the world, we show the world, we help the world to understand and to relate and to connect to the fact that the same God mentioned in the Torah, in Bereshit, and all the way through in Shemot, and all the different books of the Torah, and who runs the world, who guide the Jewish people to the desert, that this is the same God that runs the lives of the entire world, of everybody. And a very important case in point is actually from last week's Torah reading. We read last week about the story of the Akedah. The Akedah is this famous story that everyone's basically familiar with, the fact that Abraham was asked by God to bring up his only son from Sarah, his wife Sarah. He waited for 99 years to have this child, and now 37 years later, God says to him to bring him up as a sacrifice. And at an important turning point, literally a fork in the road, he goes up. It's not just him by himself. He's there with Isaac and with his trusted servant Eliezer, as well as his son from Hagar, the Egyptian, Ishmael. They're all there together. But Abraham does not know who should continue on with the journey once they get to the place that God says, this is the place, this is the Temple Mount, this is the Har Moriah, this is the place to bring Isaac up as a sacrifice. How does Abraham know? Because God shows him a vision. He's able to see a level of God that nobody else can see. So he turns to Isaac and he says to Isaac, what do you see? I see the divine presence. And it's remarkable. It's mystical. It's Kabbalistic, but it's absolutely wonderful. He says, good. That means you're supposed to come. And then he turns to Eliezer and he turns to Ishmael and he says to him, what do you see? And they can't see it. They can't see the vision. So therefore, Abraham says at that point in time to Eliezer and to Ishmael, he says, therefore you stay here. If you can't see that vision, you stay here while we go up. Now, what we have to understand was, unfortunately, it was a lacking. The ideal would have been that everybody saw it. If Abraham had been doing his job until that point, if he'd been educating and he was trying, he was doing the best he could, we really can't fault him, because unfortunately the world wasn't ready for it. But he tried. He was making souls in Haran. He came to Israel, the land of Canaan, to do the exact same. He was constantly teaching. The Talmud tells us that the tent was open on four sides. He taught the men, Sarah taught the women. But nevertheless, when it came time to this most important point where God was revealing himself on a tremendously high level that would have been so awesome for everybody to see, only Abraham and Isaac could see it. And as a result of that, it created a fork in the road that's not been repaired since, until this time. But at the end of history, finally, when Messiah comes and the evil inclination is taken from man, how does that happen? Because the clarity of God, the name of God becomes one, not just in the minds of a Jew, but in the minds of everybody. Everyone's able to see the reality of God at such a high level. Just like one person can see a higher level, another person becomes on a spiritually higher level, but nevertheless, they can relate, they can connect, it's palpable. They can feel the reality of God. That's what's going to happen in the days. That's the mission of the Jewish people. We have to do it first. It has to become real to us first. But after it becomes real to us, then it has to spill over into the rest of the world. Now, there's different ways to do that. One way is spoken about in the prophets, and that's the war of Gog and Magog, the famous war of Gog and Magog. According to tradition, there's three. According to the Chafetz Chaim, who's a rabbi who lived in the 1930s, two of them, or at least one of them, occurred in his lifetime. The second one, he predicted to be World War II. The third one still looms. We don't know exactly what it's going to be. We don't know exactly how big it's going to be. But the main point of it is, everyone's worried about the military, what's going to happen, and nuclear bombs, and hypersonic nuclear bomb. And all that is part of what's going on historically. But what God's doing, the whole point of the war of Gog and Magog, we are told, tradition teaches us, is to reintroduce God back into history. For thousands of years, the Bible has been asleep, so to speak, meaning that people moved on. There was a time that the Bible was real to everybody. Even Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia, he understood it was true. He realized that God was God, but then man moved on. and assume that the Bible closed, finished, is no longer relevant to history. It's going to reintroduce itself again. The Jewish people have been living by that Bible the entire time because we know it never went to sleep. It never closed off. But the rest of the world figured it didn't keep up with the times. So the times moved on without it. But at the end of history, it's going to come back again. And everyone's going to believe and realize that it's been relevant the entire time through. The war of Gog and Magog comes to do that, but we don't have to do it that way. The war of Gog it's a conditional reality. We can make it that the war of Gog and Magog does not have to take place, or we can make it that it's minimal. How do we do that? By doing what it comes to do. If the Jewish people take upon themselves the responsibility to educate as many people as they can, what we can't do, we can't do. That's up to God. But as many people as we can reach out, as Rivka pointed out, there are people out there who want to know, they want to understand. I once gave a class, I flew all the way from Israel to Dallas, Texas, to give a class, a couple classes there. And after the class was over, there were about 40, 50 people in the room at the time. And after the class was over, some people came over and they spoke to me, and they weren't even Jewish. They were B'nai Noach. And one particular person, he drove 700 miles just to come hear the shiur. There were people locally. I couldn't convince people locally, Jews who were living in Dallas itself, to come 20 minutes to hear a class. But these people drove hundreds of miles, and they were going to drive right back after hundreds of miles. And it left such a lasting impression on me. The yearning, the desire, the love. Would I drive 100 miles even to hear my favorite rabbi speak? Probably not. And they drove 700 miles. I mean, that was like 30 years ago. I'm still shocked, because I don't think my shiur was worth it. But he said it was, and I'm grateful. But the bottom line was, you see, there are people there, they want to know, if the vessel is there, and they want to know, they want to understand, and they're just waiting to be filled. What we're waiting for. That's why this book is an important contribution to the process. That's why I stood behind it with Rivka. We spoke about it, because this is something that's been going on for some time. And as we see from the prayer itself, as we see from the actual liturgy that we pray, our slichot and other parts of davening, that we never lose sight of this idea that our mission is to fill that container. That's our job. In ourselves first, and maybe even simultaneously, the nations of the world. The moment that we make the effort in that direction, we get tremendous heavenly help. And that itself can act as a phenomenal merit on behalf of the people involved to rise above what's going on in the world today, to be spared from it, to literally float above it, to be able to act in the most important role a person can act in this world. And that's to be a partner with God in the completion of creation. This is part of that process.
Thank you, Rabbi Winston, for your words of wisdom, connecting the message of this book in your own special way, and for echoing what I'm trying to put out there in the world. I'm very grateful. Thank you. Okay, so finally this evening we put together a panel discussion moderated by media personality, international spokesperson for the Jewish community of Hebron, Rabbi Yishai Fleischer, who's also our friend and neighbor. And we welcome three contributors. So Gidon Ariel, who you've already met, who is the CEO of RootSource, which, for those of you that aren't aware, is an organization that brings knowledgeable, authentic Israeli teachers and inquisitive Christians together to study Jewish texts. Gidon is also the publisher of Lighting Up the Nations through RootSource Press. Anarina Bat-Zion Kreisman of Align with Zion, which is a biblical advocacy project that aims to assist pro-Israel supporters in understanding the eternal covenant and dynamic between God and his people. She's the author of the chapter Rachel Weeps for Her Children, The Return of the 10 Tribes, which addresses the future reunification of the 10 lost tribes. And Rabbi Dr. Yaakov Nagain, who teaches at Yeshivat Otniel and is the director of the Biblical Institute for Interfaith Dialogue and the Beit Midrash for Judaism and Humanity. His chapter focuses on his experience teaching Torah in China. So I turn it over to Yishai and our panelists.
All right. Thank you very much. Rivka, how am I coming through?
I got you loud and clear.
Great. Okay. Shalom.
I had you.
Again?
There we
Hold
go.
on.
Now you're back.
Yeah, I'm back. Okay. Sorry about that. Little technical difficulty. Thank you very much, Dr. Rivka Adler. Very exciting to be with you here today and moderating this panel. And that's because this is a topic that so many people are afraid to touch. And yet it's so obvious to so many that we are in a period where we are coming back to the land of Israel, where God is fulfilling his promises to Abraham, where great things are happening, a Holocaust, amazing wars, an economy, a language reborn. So many things are happening. And that last piece, which is touching the nations, is such a central component. And yet so many people are afraid to touch it. So I just wanted to first wish you a big Yasher Koach and Mazal Tov on coming out with your new book, which is such a great name, which is Lighting Up the Nations. You took a passive term that Israel is supposed to be a light unto the nations and made it into an active term and to actually do that, to do the action, the act of lighting up the nations. Very exciting. And I'm excited to be with this panel today. And I hope, can I get a hello from my panelists? Can we hear you guys?
Hello, this is Gideon Ariel from down the road in Ma'ale Fever.
Good. Gideon, you're there. Good.
Okay. Yaakov Nagin from Otniel.
Wonderful.
Not too far from where you live, Yishai.
Good. Baruch Hashem. Great to see you, Rabbi. And Anarina, are you there?
Yeah. Anarina here from Jerusalem. Very happy.
Hi, how are you? Wonderful. Wonderful. You guys all sound and look great. Wonderful. So the thing is, we have a limited time. That's because we want to be kind to our wonderful audience today. So we're going to keep our answers tight as much as possible to this huge topic. Stories are always welcome, but keep your mind on your time because we have 5 questions in about 20 minutes, 3 panelists. You do the math. I didn't major in math, so but it's something short, I think. In any case, my first question, and we'll start with you, Gideon, and then to Rabbi Yaakov, and then to Rebbitzin. Are you Rebbitzin? Anarina Kreisman. We'll go in that order. You look like a Rebbitzin. Okay. Let's do it like this. The first thing is, let's ask the big question, which is, what does it mean to you when I say Or Lagoyim? What is it to be an Or Lagoyim? What is that concept? What do we do about it?
Okay, I understand that since my last name starts with Aleph, then I'll be the first one to go, even though I certainly don't deserve it. I started recognizing that there were non-Jews, specifically Christians, who were fascinated by the Old Testament and ultimately by the fact that the Jews were coming back to their land. And so many of the important prophecies were happening, whether we wanted them or not, whether the nations were recognizing them or not. God does stuff whether we want to or not. He doesn't ask for our veto. So while some people in the past might have thought that to be a light unto the nations would be to simply follow God's commandments as stringently and as carefully as one could possibly do, it didn't really sit so well with me. And especially since I became a Zionist myself in grade school and ultimately moved to Israel and recognized that what's going on over here is that not as individuals we are acting as these lights, as our children say during Hanukkah, kol echad hu or katan, each one of us is a small light, but ultimately all of us together is a large light. And if you have just a little bit of a light, that's not going to be enough. Certainly it's enough, and it's more than enough, and it's great in our generations that people can have personal relationships, and I'm a big believer in building personal relationships one-to-one. But when we see what's happening in the state of Israel, in the land of Israel, in the what you see here behind me is my backyard in the Judean desert. This is a picture taken about 8 years ago. Today it's already even more green and lush, and not to mention in the areas like in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem. So altogether, I think that the most important part of Or Lagoyim means that, as Rabbi Winston mentioned before, we are all Kohanim, we are all priests for the entire nations, all of the entire world to build a bridge between all of us humans and our God. That is what Or LaGoyim is to me.
Okay, very good. And I'm going to tighten the question a little bit to Rabbi Yaakov, which is, okay, Gidon laid out to me what I understand is, the redemptive process. But still, though, why should I get involved, or a person, or why should you get involved in reaching out to the Gentiles, to the nations? Why should I get involved in that? Why shouldn't I just leave that part alone and work on my internal stuff inside my own country, my own nation, my own Torah?
Well, I'll start with a confession, Yishai. It didn't really start with my initiative. I had a book that was, without me knowing it, was translated into Chinese. And that led to a trip to China, which I was awakened to awakening me to what I felt my own responsibilities to be in sharing the blessings from God with others. But if I take a broad perspective about the story of the Jewish people, for so long, we were on survival mode. On survival mode, we had to build big walls to separate ourselves from the world. But I think part of the process of redemption is going from survival mode to vision mode. And in the vision, the same books of the prophets that talk about the return to Zion, talk about a future about humanity together calling in the name of God and serving him together. Now, just like Zionism, the Jewish people needed initiative on our part to return to the land of Israel. We need initiative to create that reality of the future, of this partnership of calling the name of God and serving God. And that's what I see what the role is about sharing blessings from God and trying to create some sort of a consciousness to fulfill that vision of the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Anarina, what about this kind of, does the Torah have a global vision? Does it have a vision for a global redemption, or is it particular? Is touching the Gentiles, is that an imperative for all Jews or just for some Jews?
It's a biblical mandate that we have to fulfill. And I think like we have all the tribes, everybody had a specific role in it. So I don't think it's necessary for everybody to reach out. But as your neshama is making its tikkun in this world, you start to understand what your tafkid is, what your role is. And for those who are absolutely urged by this, it's very evident that we have to do it. And obviously, if we go to the Tanakh, specifically to the Yeshayahu and the prophets, it's very, very clear that we have to do it. So if we speak about the Geulah as well, we can see in Zechariah at the end, the nations will come up. Rabbi Winston also spoke about this. It's very, very clear that we are moving towards that point. And the more that we are moving towards this point, the more we can see the nations engage. We are in a place where exactly what was said, that we should move out of this defense mode and bring people in by just being, but also doing our part of sharing what we know.
Let's keep going with you, Anarina, and we'll go in backwards order now. And I'm going to skip a question and get to kind of a harder question, which is, okay, once you've come to the consciousness and maybe the personal interest, the personal connection, wanting to reach out to the Gentile world with the Torah, which in many ways has been kept inside, but now in this messianic process is going out of us into the world to a global type vision. But at the same time, there are pitfalls. There are pitfalls dealing with the Gentiles. There are pitfalls, I wanted to add, about dealing with the Gentiles, but the pitfalls with the Jews, right? I myself have fallen into challenges with other Jews who don't like it so much. So I wanted to ask you, Anarina, about the pitfalls of dealing with the Gentile world in this kind of innovative process.
So being very open about it, I think we always need to focus on Torah Lishma. Many times we can fall into the pitfalls of seeing how people can gain out of this, and this is a very big thing for me. I think it's very important that we should be extremely transparent. That which was given to us, we have such a responsibility for it, and we need to in that responsibility also share it with the nations respectfully, respecting the nations that we are reaching out to. The second thing for me is, the lines can be crossed so easily, especially in our times that we are engaging very actively with the nations, that it's a dangerous territory and we have to be very strong on who we are. I've seen so many amazing people that need to, we are changing slowly but steadily the current landscape of the world's tainted view of us. So it can bring a tremendous amount of negative energy as well. But it's how we position ourselves and how we stay strong in it, and how we understand then working from there, reaching out to the nations.
Right. And I would guess that for some people, they actually get strengthened through it, right? It's there are pitfalls, but at the end, you are strengthened through meeting great people and seeing that there's a great scene in the movie Abraham by TNT where Abraham meets Melchizedek, and he finally sees that there's somebody else who sees, the God of heaven and earth. And I think that's what happens when you meet along the road people who believe in the Bible, believe in God. You're just like, wow, this is something that touches everybody. It's not just my Cosa Nostra. It's something that's out there in the world. Rabbi Yaakov, have you bumped into pitfalls, hardships, mistakes that you faced along this journey?
Yes, I think two important critical points. First of all, to realize that nations is plural, and I think you have to really always see and understand the audience that you're dealing with, because the truths that are needed by one group are not necessarily the truths that are needed by a different group. For example, so if in China, I would talk a lot about individuality and the value of multiple opinions, because this is what in China they were challenged by, and the divine value of every human life. But on the other hand, Rabbi Sachs, who talks to a Western audience, will talk about going from the I to the we, talking about community, because that's what that audience needs to hear. So I think it's important to realize you don't want a book that's going to be translated into 100 languages. Mm-hmm. You want a book written in the right language, in the right mentality, which is giving people what is they need to grow in their path of Avodat Hashem and personal growth. So, and one very negative, I once wrote some article about the Zohar about for a New Age website, but there somehow they took a lot of this, what's sacred about male-female relations, and they took it to a place which was very much a sacrilege to the sacred. So again, realizing to give to people what they need and what they really need, and not necessarily what they think they need.
Okay, very good, Rabbi Yaakov. Very good. That's a good point. I think that brings up a question in my mind, which is probably the majority of the conversation that we're having now is a very Western-facing light unto the nations. But in my work, I have not a little bit of Eastern-facing light unto the nations, and I mean here to the Middle East region, which I feel like we're really not doing that much at all about. And yet these are the people that we touch all the time. And yet there's almost no kind of intersection between our religious and godly worldview, which is funny. Maybe it's because we're close that we keep each other apart. But in many ways, there's a lot of similarity and emotional similarity. You could speak with an Arab person about the existence of God, and it's the most normal thing in the world. And I guess I'm just making the point that you were saying, which is know who you're speaking with. Know who you're speaking with. Gidon, any thoughts on the pitfalls, the challenges, and maybe you can answer the question of, have you faced any challenges from the Jewish world while dealing with the Gentile world?
I think that those of us who are active know that first of all, the biggest challenge is that throughout the centuries, it's been very clear that Jews are here and everybody else is on the other side. And we even raise that to an ideal when we call Abraham HaIvri, that we are following Abraham HaIvri's footsteps, that we are on this side. Abraham HaIvri huya ba'evra hazeh, v'kol ha'olam ba'evra hasheni. And when I and some of my colleagues here are saying we're now in a different time, a different era, we're now in the end zone, as it were. If so many ideas about whether we're allowed to move to Israel, whether we're allowed to create a state of Israel, a Jewish state in the land of Israel, Shloshat HaShavuot, for people who are familiar with those. Today, that's a non-starter because we're already way past that. I think that shows us that in the end times, we can maybe look at things a little differently. And that is why I'm encouraging people to try to step out of your comfort zone and to start engaging with Christians, with other kinds of non-Jews, because we have the strength today. People are looking at us like the older brother that we are. But too many people are saying, no, you're not allowed. And maybe these Christians who are interested in learning Torah, they're going to learn it for an improper reason. I think that anything can happen, but I think that so many more, from my own experience of teaching Christians for over a decade, there are, I'm not going to say hundreds and thousands, because there are hundreds and millions of Christians who have not yet tasted Tamu or Kitab Hashem. Come and taste how beautiful God's word is. And this is the next stage, that root source, that I'm trying to bring Christians and Jews together on a basis of mutual respect, to try to bring more Jews, more teachers into this. This is the next great frontier that this book. I'm so pleased that Rivka has taken upon herself to bring together these scholars to show how important it is, how seeped in tradition, Jewish tradition it is, and how important it is for the future for Jewish teachers to recognize we're not only supposed to teach in our little shtetl, in our little cheder, but we have to build that cheder so much bigger in order to reach the entire world. And that is our challenge, both for ourselves, to bring ourselves out of that paradigm, and to hopefully bring more and more Jews out of that paradigm as well. That is what I see as the big problem, the big issue.
Very good, Gideon. Very, very good. I just wanted to add that whenever you start moving towards a geula, a redemptive mitzvah, for example, Aliyah, you start talking about Aliyah in New York, you're going to also, people are going to appreciate you, and some people are going to be challenged by you. They're going to feel personally attacked by you because you're challenging their status quo. Same thing for Tchelet. You're like, you know what, that white tzitzis doesn't do it for me anymore. I want to wear the blue string, but that challenges some people. They see it as a personal affront. Same thing I find a mitzvah that I'm very concerned with, which is going up to the Temple Mount, Har HaBayit. So you go to Har HaBayit, but there's an anti-energy that comes up, and people are like, why are you doing that? Am I therefore less of a Jew? Is it allowed? Are you breaking the law? Et cetera, et cetera. And so too is with reaching out to the Gentiles. There's a lot of people who are afraid of that, and they come out of a very fearful doctrine vis-a-vis the Gentiles, which is totally understandable. But as another person I think is in the forefront of this field, which is Rabbi Jeremy Gimpel, has told me many years ago, he said to me, listen, like, we should not be afraid. We're living at a time where God is revealing the Jewish people and revealing the Torah. We're not going to accept now Christianity. We have nothing to be afraid of. So we should be out there teaching it to the world. But there are definitely folks who push back against that within our own camp. Okay, Gideon, we're going to still stick with you and go the other way now. The reason I want to stick with you is because you mentioned a few times the end zone, the end times. So first thing, so this is a one question in kind of two parts, which is, are you sure we're in end times? This is a student just asked me this the other day. Are you sure we're in end times? And if yes, can you articulate your vision? I'm going to ask all the speakers to articulate a vision of what messianic times in their mind looks like. And I think, by the way, it's not one, right? It's not going to be one vision, since it's not given to us what it's really going to look like. So go ahead, Gideon, give us a thought about what messianic times is. This messianic times, and what do messianic times look like?
I personally moved to Israel as a youngster from America, from New York. And I've been about 40 years ago, and I've been seeing how Israel has been growing and growing and growing. I think also there are many other aspects that we see in modern times that we haven't seen. I think that the very what's it called, the industrial revolution. Today we have the technological revolution, the internet revolution. All of these things, I think, are God bringing the world closer together in order for us to be able to be closer to him ultimately. Until that happens, we're just testing it out. If you're buying a car in order to to drive to the Beit HaMikdash, well, on the way, you can maybe use that car to do some other things as well. So I think that all of these amazing things that are happening at cutthroat rate is part of that Messianic times. Will there be a specific King Messiah? What will he look like? Is the fact that the King Messiah has not yet been coronated mean that we are not in his times yet at all? I disagree with that. I think that when the King Messiah will ultimately be coronated, as Maimonides writes in his book of the laws of kings and their wars, there will be things that we're not participating in yet, or perhaps we will see ipso facto that we have been participating in. Maybe these wars are the wars that we're already been fighting. So if the complete Messianic times includes the complete return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, the complete return of the Jewish people to their relationship with God, which we still see it's very, it's just the beginning. It's growing faster, but still much to go. The temple rebuilt and the service reinstated, that is something that I'm also participating in. Again, it's going very, very slowly, very difficult, but it's happening. But I think that the ultimate aspect of Messianic times is, as others have stated in tonight's program, that the entire world, all comers to the world will recognize that God is one and his name is one. And I think that is our responsibility. So I think that I today am participating in God's plan to bring the Messianic times. At exactly what point are we on over there? That's up to God to be specific.
Very good.
But I'm definitely right there.
Gideon, thank you very much. Just to mix it up, I'm going to go to Anarina, and the question here is, are we in Messianic times? What does it look like? And also throw in the concluding thoughts. It fits with Messianic, with end times, to concluding thoughts together. What do you think, Anarina?
I think absolutely. There is such a tremendous awareness happening right now. I think the birth of Israel was the starting point, and whatever has been happening and accumulating from there, absolutely. The sages tell us that it's going to be compared like the dawn. We're going in stages, and we can see how these stages are building, and more awareness is coming. For me personally, it's about the unification, not just of Hashem's name, but also the tribes that are coming back, and the nitzotzot, the sparks that are gathering. It is so clear that these things are happening, and we need to take what we have right now, and every step that we take takes us to a higher place. So the key here is for all these unification processes that are taking place, and how we're moving towards that. Ultimately, the Torah is going to fall out on much higher levels for us as well. So we just need to, as a Jewish people, for what this book is about, is we need to get out of our galut mindset. We need to get out of that klippah, and we need to start recognizing other people coming out of their klippot. And it's very clear it's happening, and I'm very excited about that.
Very good. I like what you're saying about, for us to reach out to them, we got to break out of our own kind of limited mindset. Some people say that the word "hayinu kecholmim," we were like as dreamers, has a positive side, which is, wow, what a dream come true. There's another side, which is, hey, you're sleepwalking. Redemption is happening, and you're not with it. You are not catching up to the greatness of the time. And so wake up, snap out of it, and realize what great time we're in. Thank you very much for your thoughts. And Rabbi Yaakov, batting cleanup, give us a vision for, give us a Messianic vision.
Are we in the end of times? I think the answer should be, which is the most terrifying answer, that it depends on us. Mm-hmm. We believe in free choice, and we believe that we need a partnership of Am Yisrael with the plans of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So to say yes might undercut what we have to demand of ourselves, that it is that if we act and push the things the way they should be, yes, we are in the end of times. But if we neglect our responsibilities, then maybe we're not. One point I'd like to add to the important point mentioned by the previous speakers, I think part of it, I think there's a need also for humility in finding our connection with humanity. Even the Kuzari, for example, talks about the Jewish people in the humanity as a heart among the limbs of the body. But obviously, a heart can't exist on its own. There's a role and for every limb of the body. And I feel what makes the world beautiful and the future beautiful, that it will be that every place and every person will have their role with the spark inside of them. And I'll just end with an image that Rav Ashkenazi, a Talmud of Rav Tzvi Yehuda, would say that the humanity, it's like every country of the world is like a flower. And the role of the Jewish people is we need that string to tie the flowers together and create that beautiful bouquet in front of God. Thank you.
Very good. Well, I want to thank this great panel, Gidon Ariel, Rabbi Dr. Yaakov Negin, and Anna-Rina Kreisman. You guys are wonderful. And thank you very much to our host, Dr. Rivka Adler, who has courageously written a book that is leading us into a bold new era of connecting with the world and making this Geula process not just one for the Jewish people, but one for the world, and therefore making the world the vision that God wanted for it, which is a fixed, a mitukan world, a real tikkun olam is happening. Dr. Rivka, thank you so much.
Yishai, thank you so much. And thank you to our panelists, to Gidon and to Anna-Rina and to Rav Yaakov, and to Rabbi Winston, of course, and to those of you who joined us. I have to say how incredibly exciting it is for me, because these are things that I think about all the time, and to bring people together who care about these issues and have what to say about them, it feels like an intellectual party, a spiritual party, and I'm very, very grateful to all of you for being here. Before we end, I just want to ask my publisher and my friend Gidon if you have any last words.
My last words, thank you very much, are my same first words, and that is to encourage everybody to buy the book, of course, and also to reach out to Rivka and to myself and to anybody else you want. This is the internet, everybody. You reach out to people. It's Internet 3.0 or something like that. Find us on Facebook, find us on email, find us on Zoom, and don't be timid, be bold. Only bold people can actually learn. So if you are one of the nations who has come here to see what it is from the Jewish perspective, reach out to the teacher that sounds best to you. Buy the book, read the chapters, see which of those teachers are you interested in learning from, and you will also see that you will be teaching them as well. I just like to once again show the website that you can look at, as Rivka so kindly put the link in the chat, roottheirsource.com. Through the store, you can get to the book Lighting Up the Nations. And over here, you can choose which type of edition is best for you. And we're looking forward to hearing from you. Okay, so I guess we will say thank you all very much. You can unmute yourselves as is proper during Zooms to say goodnight and thank you. And we're looking forward to seeing you all in Israel. Bezrat Hashem.
I'd like to get more involved with what you're doing. Let's be in contact.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Yoshua. Even though you don't live in Yehuda, you live in Shomron, you live in Binyamin and Kochav HaShachar, we will also allow you as well, of course.
Well, sure.
Toda Rabba.
We'll talk.
Yes. Be by all means.
I definitely. I have to have the book,
Toda Rabba, Simcha.
Toda Rabba.
Thank you from Ephraimites. Thank you.
Shalom.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.
Thank you.
Okay, good night, everybody.